There's a lot of history up and down this White River. It's too much of a secret in America. The average person, especially people in the city, maybe they don't have a chance to get outdoors so much. Just one of my favorite parts about the Ozarks, these towering limestone bluffs. I'm kind of a daydreamer, but along the way, you can be on this beautiful stream, immersed in nature. 200 feet up above you is a big limestone cliff. And that's really the birthplace of our company, is the White River, of Bass Pro Shop. I just met some of the best friends in my life, and it was like, you could use this term camaraderie, but it was really just happy times together.
The White River starts in the mountains of North Arkansas, winding through the Ozarks along the border with Missouri. Its smallmouth float fishing was legendary in the first half of the 20th century. Then the dam building began, creating 3 new large lakes that would turn out to play a huge role in the history of the sport of bass fishing. This is the story of the White River and of 3 individuals, innovators and dedicated bass anglers, who would invent and build an industry and help shape a culture centered around this sport that meant everything to them.
The White River is a defining characteristic of the Ozarks. And in the mid-20th century, when the Corps of Engineers built these large dams like on Bull Shoals and North Fork Lakes, it created new fisheries, and it also created new industries. And this whole group of innovators come along then, like Johnny Morris at Bass Pro Shops, Jerry McKinnis, Forrest Wood, and it makes you wonder, I mean, is there something in the water?
There is something magical about this White River. There is, and it has a way of grabbing a hold of you if it wants you to.
The magical part about this right here, it's as simple as it can be, son. You're in Missouri and Arkansas, and you have got the finest people, the most sincere. You can depend on them, folks, in the entire world.
Well, it's probably the fishery itself is one reason why so many good anglers came from this area over the years, because it's so diverse. You've got Long Creek, Kings River, and Roaring River, and the James is a major tributary, you know, and Bull Shoals has a ton of tributaries coming in it, as does Beaver, and so there's lots and lots of water here. And that's one reason I think it's produced so many good fishermen, because there's so many opportunities available to fish here.
You know, it was a different world here before the dam was built. Fishing was not recreational necessarily, and people survived fishing these rivers and creeks and before the lakes. So it was a different atmosphere. Dirt roads, you know, unpaved roads over to Bull Shoals. The Bull Shoals area wasn't even formed then. And I think when the change happened, it was when people began to realize that, you know, there really was another side to the fishing side of things, and it was recreational. And it brought people in here by the droves.
The White River begins its 720-mile journey in the Boston Mountains of northwest Arkansas. For untold centuries, it was wild and untamed as it wound through the Ozarks, cutting ever wider and deeper gorges through the rock and sand, flowing south and east toward the Arkansas River Delta. In the lower reaches, it deposited soil on a gentle landscape suited for farming, but up north, near the source, the terrain was tougher, and the farmer's existence more hardscrabble. But the river and the landscape was constant, and the scenery, with the towering bluffs and lush forest, was and is remarkable. On the route, the river is joined by many other streams, including the North Fork from Missouri and the famous Buffalo National River. But in the mid-20th century, a turning point arrived. In 1947, the construction of the Bull Shoals Dam forever altered the river's natural flow. The dam, completed in 1951, harnessed the river's power. A massive lake, dwarfing all other impoundments in the area, was created. True, the river was no longer free-flowing, but what was gained was a chance for rural communities to have electricity, more reliable irrigation and flood control, and a new form of recreation. The White River was changed forever.
A lot of things happened. There's a lot of people that had a entrepreneur mind that come in here, and we were fortunate to have those people that were good thinkers, and they started to change the way that we lived here.
Hi, I'm Keith Daffrin. I'm from Flippin, Arkansas, on the banks of the White River. Spent my entire life here growing up with Forrest as my grandfather, spending time in the outdoors and fishing with him. I used to love to get stories, especially as I got older and could absorb them better, you know, of what it must have been like to have turned 18 in a world that looked much different than this, and to be able to get a job on the construction of Bull Shoals Dam, and to know he was producing something that would change the landscape, not just of this area, but of the world forever. And to me, that just, I think that was kind of the beginning of so much in his life where he contributed, whether it was in a small way or in a big way. Forrest has collected so many things, and I think it's because they were a generation, to put it bluntly, of poverty. And so you didn't throw anything away, everything had value, and what you're referring to is a contract with the Flippin School District where he drove a school bus to and from school his senior year, and that says a lot about his maturity. It says a lot about his entrepreneurial spirit, the willingness to earn a buck at that point, and I think a lot of it was built out of necessity, but he carried it much past that. When it wasn't necessary, Forrest still had that work ethic.
You're watching The Cast, presented by Bass Pro Shops.
Now that the Bull Shoals Dam was in place, the nature of the White River fishery changed. Behind the dam, the water, of course, became deeper as the reservoir filled. And in the newly created Bull Shoals Lake, new environments for fish were created, growing the population of smaller bait fish and causing an expansion of all the fish populations. Anglers saw a lot of success in this bloom period, catching everything from the smaller panfish to well-fed larger predator fish. And that deep water that was released through the dam changed the fishery in the original riverbed. The deep water was cold, too cold for most of the bass and many other populations. So trout were stocked in the river, and they thrived, creating a demand for guided river fishing trips. Forrest Wood, who had worked on the building of the dam, had now found work as one of those guides.
He told a story that he and Nina, he took off one evening, which was pretty unusual for him to take off work, but he took off work one evening and they found a JP and a couple of witnesses and they went and got married. So that was it. He honeymooned on the dam.
You know, the kids today call them power couples. Forrest and Nina were the original power couples to me, or a power couple. Their way of working together, it didn't matter what it was. It could have been cooking a Thanksgiving meal, but regardless, they had a way of working in true tandem that I think exemplifies what we would all want in a relationship.
A guy named Geo Tilley, who was a relative of ours, built the first boat dock. They had a list of guides, and Forrest Wood was guide number one. Forrest was a younger one. There's some old timers even then, but had just a great group of people, and large groups would come in. I remember whether it was Kansas City or Tulsa or St. Louis, and these people would come in, a large party, and a lot of times would camp on the river, and it wasn't unusual to have 3-4 day camp trips and spend 3 nights out on the river. And it was pretty remote. It wasn't just, you know, camping in the RV, it was camping in a tent on a gravel bar. All these guys, these original guides, they would float down the river with a small horsepower motor, and if they were going to Cotter or Buffalo or Norfolk, depending on how long the trip was, and then they'd load them up on a flatbed truck. And it took some ump to get them loaded. They were heavy as could be, and the boats had kind of evolved, but they're all 20-foot boat. They had been slatted on the bottom to give extra beef, you know, so they could get over these shoals. So they were very heavy, and they'd load 6 or 8 of those things up and haul them back. We would clean them up, put them back in the stalls, start all over the next day. And it was quite an experience. But the fishing was great, and it always was. This is a great fishery and always has been.
Well, now it's turned into a wonderful cold water trout fishery. The water comes out from beneath Table Rock Dam and have wonderful rainbow and brown trout fishing.
Those cold water releases from the dams created an incredible trout fishery, and it's produced a number of world records over the years in Arkansas, both brown trout and some big rainbows too. But it also created new warm water fisheries in Bull Shoals, Table Rock, Beaver Lake, Norfolk, and you can catch all 3 species of black bass: smallmouth, spotted bass, largemouth, as well as things like walleye, stripers, good crappie fishing. It's truly a smorgasbord of recreational fishing.
When these lakes were created, the fishing became so good, and they were pioneers. The whole popularity of the sport really exploded because of the quality of the fishing down there in the Ozarks, and it was legendary. Take city slickers and people from all walks of life to go float fishing on the White River. My mom and dad were both born in 1911 in a little town just north of Springfield here called Willard. I think of my dad a lot. In every day in life, he introduced me to fishing, but he was my mentor and really my hero in life. And he's an old country guy, and they didn't have much, and then, you know, the Depression came along. But I do remember my earliest memories were getting ready to go fish with my mom and dad, and we'd go out, and I hate to even say this being in the lure business, but we used to go out and seine crawdads and run minnow traps, and then we go float fishing here in the Ozarks. We camped out a lot on gravel bars, and, you know, we'd fry up smallmouth at night and some beans and listen to whippoorwills, but so happy that fishing's been a part of my life.
The White River, in the days before and after its mid-century transformation, was a place that inspired thousands of anglers and thousands of fishing tales. It was also a crossroads that brought remarkable folks together. Like in the 50s, when Forrest Wood, a young fishing guide with big dreams, crossed paths with an eager newcomer. A chance encounter that produced a lifelong friendship between 2 more achievers who would put their lasting mark on the fishing world.
You're watching The Cast, presented by Bass Pro Shops.
Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Jerry McKinnis. Jerry.
By the time the 1980s had arrived, TV fishing shows had been around a few decades. They were almost all local or regional series, but emerging from the pack and finding a national audience was a show called The Fishing Hole.
Holy cow!
With its host and star, Jerry McKinnis.
My name's Jerry McKinnis. Welcome to The Fishing Hole.
The reason for his popularity and the show's success was undoubtedly his laid-back style that perfectly matched what fishing was about for most folks.
I want to talk to you about throwing this topwater bait today.
escape from the cares and stress of daily life, plus his incredible ability to tell a great story. His love and enthusiasm for fishing shine through every frame of every show. And his love of another sport, the sport of baseball, had, in a roundabout way, led him to fishing fame.
He was a great baseball player at that time. That was mid-50s when he was freshman, sophomore, junior, senior of high school. And then when he graduated high school, he got drafted by the Kansas City A's and quickly realized he was not gonna make it. He was the type that had a list of things that he wanted to do. Baseball was his first love and hoped to do that. Didn't make it. The second thing he wanted to do was somehow be involved in fishing. He always loved to fish. His dad always took him fishing. He loved to fish. He saw the White River in a magazine and knew that that was a place he had to go on his bucket list. So the second he got cut from baseball, he went to the White River.
I can't tell it like Jerry does in his book, but he's finally at the White River, and he's so excited. You guys remember being that way on a fishing trip, and Jerry makes his way down to that dock, and this long, skinny, tall, lanky cowboy walks up. He stuck his hand out and he said, "Hi, Mr. McKinnis. I'm Forrest Wood, and I'll be your guide today."
The most important 30 seconds of my life came walking down a boat dock and the guide walking out and saying, "I'm Forrest Wood, I'll be your guide today." That was the most important 30 seconds of my life.
He'd read about the place called Bull Shoals, Arkansas, on White River. He came down there to go on a float trip, and that was the beginning of a relationship that goes back quite a long while. My life's better because I've met Jerry McKinnis.
I think God puts those seasons of life in there for a reason, so Jerry and Forrest can meet on the White River for the very first time, because that's where God's work is just evident to me. And so Jerry and Forrest were destined to meet there that morning, and they had what it took to follow that path from there forward.
It was two people on a crash course to do what they did. He was going to get involved in fishing and somehow, and Forrest Wood was already involved in fishing because he was a guide on the White River. Jerry McKinnis was the type of guy who, if he wanted to do something, he was going to do it. And if he wanted to be a guide on the White River, in his mind, he's capable of being a guide on the White River. Him and Forrest have that same ability to think of it and then do it. So he started guiding on the White River and guiding all different clients. One in particular was a guy by the name of Brick Lyle, who lived in Little Rock, went up there and fished with him, and on one of their float trips said, "You should move to Little Rock and run this boat dock that I'm involved in." And that was Jolly Rogers on Maumelle Lake in Little Rock.
A chance to run his own fishing dock and at a new hot fishing lake. Jerry was all in, and it led him to a new opportunity, one that would change his life.
The fishing was so good on Lake Maumelle, he contacted the local news and said, "You should come out here and do a story on this because the fishing is fantastic. We'll just do a little 2-minute feature here, and we'll hold up a stringer of fish and show you what they're doing to promote, to get people to come to the marina."
My goal at that time was, I'll get to talk to a lot of people and it'll help my guide business, and I'll get a few extra guide trips. And that was my goal.
The local show actually started from someone from the news of Channel 7 there in Little Rock inviting me to come down there and give some fishing report type stuff one evening. And I did that, and it was very popular, and one thing led to another until people wanted to see a little bit of film, and they wanted something regular on fishing.
From those beginnings, the idea of a full-length show called The Fishing Hole came to fruition.
I did my first television show in 1964, February of 1964. And that's the camera we used for several years. Naturally, when I first started the show, it wasn't called The Fishing Hole. As a matter of fact, it was called the Arkansas Sportsman. It was just a show in Arkansas.
Now he's doing the Arkansas Sportsman. And that is basically in Arkansas. Wherever Channel 7 is broadcast in Arkansas, that's where you can see the Arkansas Sportsman with Jerry McKinnis. Now then, one of those guys that he guided back on the White River by the name of Jim Mannion was the sales director at a station in Kentucky. He knew Jerry was doing a show. He and Jerry were friends. He says, we can take your show that you're doing on Channel 7 and we can syndicate it. We'll put it on our channel in Kentucky and I'll go around and start selling all of the markets, and now we can start bringing in bigger sponsors and more sponsors and that kind of thing.
So we started doing a regional show in Kentucky and Indiana and Illinois, West Virginia, and Tennessee. We did that for several years. And let's look at some of the film now that we used on that syndicated show. And incidentally, another fella that got started about the same time I did is a gentleman by the name of Forrest Wood. Forrest started making Ranger boats about the time I started shooting fishing shows. And fortunately, we've crossed paths time and time again all through the years.
Of course, I grew up with my dad, and I've spent meaningful minutes with Johnny Morris and Forrest Wood, and they all sort of have this same desire to A, create something, and 2, be great about it. Forrest had the idea of doing something with fiberglass, because fiberglass was a new technology, a new thing. His original idea was he was going to make phone booths out of fiberglass.
I think Forrest had such a vision that maybe he didn't even know he had. He used to jokingly say, I was just trying to make payroll on Friday. But it was deeper than that. Looking back, Forrest understood the collective nature of what was trying to be done in the industry. And he knew that if you could raise the tide, it would lift all ships, and his included.
And the lake was pretty hot then. It was, it was new. There was a lot of fish there. He was guiding on the lake a lot at night and then fishing on the river in the daytime. Had a deeper V entry, real flat bottom in the back, rode very rough. 15-horse motor was a big one. Benches across where you fished off of the bench, you couldn't turn around. No elevated decks, and just no conveniences. Of course, there wasn't a need of it, because you've got to realize we're transitioning from, fish for food to fish for fun. The first thing that Forrest thought we needed was to elevate the deck so you could actually fish off of it instead of out of it. So you're not peeking out of the side of the boat, you're sitting on the deck and fishing. He saw a need and tried to fill it, and that's when we started building the fiberglass bass boats. And Forrest and a couple of people started that, and in 1968 they built 6 boats down there on Main Street. I joined the company then, and I went to work for Forrest when I was 15. So I had the honor of being able to be with those at a very early age and with those guys. And we had some guys there that just really knew what they were doing, and there was a lot of, it was being developed, so no one really knew what the playbook was. We just had to be written.
What happened was another guy from Alabama who has the idea of starting bass fishing tournaments holds the first tournament for B.A.S.S. on Beaver Lake, which is not far from the White River. Ray Scott came down and started doing tournaments. Forrest identifies that there's a need there for a fiberglass bass boat, and so he's going to make a bass boat that's fiberglass, and that became Ranger boats. They made the very first fiberglass Ranger in a garage, and Jerry actually got the second Ranger that was ever built, still has it today. While they're talking about making Ranger boats and thinking about doing fishing shows, Ray Scott is thinking about starting a tournament series. All that's happening at the same time. Forrest and Jerry both ended up fishing several B.A.S.S. events before they ended up doing what they ultimately were going to do.
The leader of the National Club Program.
Ray Scott had one of his very early day bass tournaments in 1970. It was in November. You know, somehow maybe I had just gotten a Bassmaster magazine, or I heard about it and I signed up. I showed up at that tournament. I think the entry fee was $200. Went there and I met other fishermen right off the bat, and it was fascinating. Like we were fishing 80 feet deep, which I'd never done. But then there were all these fishermen there. Many of them were innovators. Carl Lawrence, the inventor of the Lawrence fish finder, the little green box. Forrest Wood, the pioneer of the modern day is Ranger bass boat. I was meeting all these fishermen from all around the country, and they had all these lures, you know, and I just thought, man, this is great. Sometimes I'd take a little Kodak camera or something and take pictures with whoever won, and I knew what kind of lures they went on. Those were the happiest days of my life, I'm not kidding. Get in my truck, meet these other buddies, drive around and see America and go to these daydream reservoirs. Ray Scott, man, what did he mean? That guy, I don't know what I would have done in my life. Fishing would have been a great hobby. Because Ray Scott, he fueled this whole industry. And man, he was something else. If it wasn't for him, I don't know where I'd be in life, but it wouldn't have been near as happy a trail. Going to those tournaments helped me starting Bass Pro and to stay close to emerging trends. And it's ironic, but where we're sitting today in Bass Pro Shops, our headquarters store, it used to be Gibson's Discount, like an early day Walmart. I was a real good customer in their fishing and their sporting goods department. So I make a list of all these lures I heard about. And I kept going back to the manager, who's a buddy, said, Johnny, I'm sorry, but I just can't get permission from the home office to carry these items. So then I approached my dad, and he had a liquor store on the way to Table Rock. I said, Dad, we need to put this bass gear in there. And he was pretty reluctant about it at first. He said he tried to sell lures and tackle because he loved to fish, but he said it didn't work out too good. But my dad is my best buddy in life, and he supported me to try it. He co-signed the note, and me and a buddy, Steve Reed, got a U-Haul trailer and went to Tulsa. And another fisherman that I'd met, Don Butler, had a shop called Okie Bug, and he wholesaled. So we got this U-Haul trailer. We had $10,000. We spent every nickel of it for our inventory and put it in that trailer. Bought a padlock at 7-Eleven. We came back and the trailer was still there. So I thought about that oftentimes, you know, something would have happened to that trailer, that would have been the end of Bass Pro Shops right there. But we called our first store Bass Pro Shop because it was real descriptive of what we wanted to do, what we once wanted to specialize in bass gear.
You're watching The Cast, presented by Bass Pro Shops.
In the heart of the White River, Forrest Wood started as a fishing guide. His passion for the sport led him to a bold new venture, building bass boats. Like most entrepreneurs, the start of his trip on the road to success with Ranger boats was not a smooth one. It was filled with challenges, including a devastating one in 1971 that nearly wiped out everything he'd worked so hard to create.
I think that the first couple of years was pretty tough. In 1971, in May, I was working nights gel coating, and the plant burned to the ground. And it was the biggest fire that Flip had ever had. They had one little fire truck, and it was just kind of useless, but you know, it was burning. There was a lot of fiberglass and composite materials there, and resin and so forth. The place burned down to the ground. And Forrest always laughed and said it definitely wasn't an insurance fire because he had no insurance. Nobody would insure a place like that. We didn't even own a broom. And so fiberglass was quite messy, but we learned a lot from that. Within 40 days, actually, we started cleaning up. It was smoldering and a little bulldozer was operating, and friends and neighbors came, and the guy that actually had built the first boat dock on White River, a guy named Geo Tilley, he told Forrest, my place is yours to use, and we started doing the tooling. We built all the tools. We built all the tooling by day, and then Forrest hung lights, and he found a building that was already a prefab building that someone had backed out on, and we got that and assembled it at night. In 40 days, we gel coated the first boat in that operation. So yeah, it was a storybook, story, and it really goes back to, whatever's in the water around here.
And so he just had such a personable demeanor that you just wanted to be a part. And I've heard it said that Forrest was the kind of guy you just didn't want to let down. And I think that's very true, and it's also attributable to why he was so successful.
The reason it made it is because Forrest and Nina, they were just, the right people at the right time. They treated everybody well. Forrest had a great personality, and Nina was kind of the other side of that made sure that, we showed up for work and did the right thing in that regard. But Forrest was just a very unusual person. I've said many times that he was 1 in a million, but I don't believe that's true. I think it's more like 1 in a couple 100 million, maybe.
Ranger boat, nothing beats the feet another running the one known far and wide. Ranger boat.
Despite the fire, Forrest Wood's resilience and unwavering vision would propel Ranger boats to new heights. In the years that followed, the company thrived, becoming perhaps the top name in bass boats and setting the standard for innovation and quality. Ranger's success would continue to grow, forever cementing Forrest's legacy as one of the most influential figures in bass fishing history. But Forrest wasn't the only one making waves. One of his best friends and also former guide, Jerry McKinnis, was carving out his own path, finding massive success in the world of outdoors and fishing programming on cable television.
Now he's blanketing the country. All of the markets are carrying what's now called the fishing hole. As sort of down home as you might think he is, he was always looking to be at a top tier with his show. He was in Maine recording a fishing show and was in his hotel one evening. That's when cable started. And he flips on the TV and there's a network called ESPN. And they're part sports, part entertainment at the time. By the way, that was only in the Northeast in the beginning. If you think about it, cable was coming on in 1980. That's when it was starting to blow up, and he was like, I gotta be a part of that. So he went to their office and said, I want to be on your cable network. And they worked out a deal, and he started airing on ESPN in 1980.
Along comes ESPN, the cable network, and I think that was really one of the greatest breaks for the fishing hole and for myself. Spread it out all over the United States and even a little bit further, I guess, on a regular basis. And man, we got to all kinds of fishermen and began to shoot all kinds of great fishing film.
You know what? That is a bigger smallmouth than the other one you caught.
I'll tell you something, they could really play defense, Jerry, right after you all night long. They would never let up. Be tough scoring against 5 of those guys.
It would, wouldn't it?
Whether he was spending the day in the boat with a legendary sports figure or walking the bank of the pond with his dog, Jerry made you feel like you fit right in. It was a gift that would always serve him and his audience, even as his influence in outdoor television began to expand rapidly through his association with ESPN. He was instrumental in creating the first hours-long block of outdoor programming on the network. He also produced many great American events projects and was in on the creation and production of the Great Outdoor Games. And when he turned his attentions to his beloved sport of bass fishing, big things began to happen there as well, as he applied a new approach to covering fishing tournaments.
Jerry McKinnis took fishing across the country and across the world and introduced people that might have never encountered that or ever experienced that. And I think a lot of us live vicariously through that. I think it inspired people to go out and seek things that were beyond their back door or beyond, what they knew and what they were familiar with.
He's done more for the sport than he could ever be recognized for. Jerry was always there when the sport needed a bump. and Jerry was just the guy to give it to us.
It was just evident that he was driving a lot of what was going on in the industry I'm talking about without everybody really knowing or understanding that, I think.
His shows help ignite the passion for modern day bass fishing, no question about it. A great man.
Because his roots were here, we always felt like he was ours, and we was pretty darn proud of him.
The fishing naturally is the most important thing that there's been within the show. But I've always felt like the show was built of people and not of fish.
I have to tell you, when I started back in the early 60s, I had no idea what I was doing. I really had no idea, especially with no guidance, and it was really difficult to do. And so I learned by trial and error, and I had no idea that this was going to happen.
You look at what Jerry was able to accomplish and all these connections he made, and to think that it all started with a trout fishing trip with Forrest Wood on the White River, it's just a remarkable journey and a remarkable story.
The White River has been part of everything I've done. It took until I turned 18 years old myself and purchased a guide license and guided while I was in college before I could truly zone in and focus on the magic of the White River. I've got so many cherished stories, whether it be Jerry or Forrest or Collective, you know, and Jerry's book outlines a lot of them. But we were in this building one afternoon and had some people here that we were just showing around, and Jerry leaned against that boat. And as you know, Jerry can once in a while, when he takes a notion, he can just give it to you, and he did. Boats are special, but this one's up there. You know, it wasn't long before we lost Jerry that he stood right here at a group of people he was addressing, and he told the story about why this boat is red, and I could see it in his eyes just how meaningful this time in his life must have been, and how it changed. It changed the course for not just him and his family, but for countless others along the way. And I'm incredibly grateful that I was here for that. You know, as Jerry told the story, he asked me, he said, "Keith, do you know why this boat is red?" And I said, "Gosh, Jerry, I have to point to the St. Louis Cardinals, I would assume." And he said, "No, that's not it." He said, I was shooting a show in Connecticut, and I happened to be in a hotel that had a color television, and I realized the vibrance and what that was going to change in the course of television in general, but certainly for his show. So he called Forrest that night and said, "Forrest, I want you to build me a boat as the brightest red you could possibly build." And to this day, I look back and think about how important those subtle things were to Jerry and Forrest, how they always had an innovating nature and spirit, and I'm just so thankful that he was willing to share that story with me and others, and I'm able to share it with you.
Well, there's a lot of history up and down this White River. And it's not just catching a fish or chasing a buck, but it's making memories doing it. The heart of a sportsman who's connected to the nature. You can't get totally connected through a book, through movies, or for a professor. But sportsmen and women, I salute them every day. They're heroes. That's their heart and their passion, things they've grown to love. So welcome to the original Bass Pro Shops. It was actually Brown Derby Bass Pro Shop, my dad's liquor store, just about 3 miles south of here. First 13 years, our only store was my dad's liquor store. Many original parts of the store, just memories of fishing buddies from the tournaments, the happiest days really of my life, and kept us real close to other anglers and trends in fishing. My favorite pictures, Roland Martin, Tom Mann, the Mann's Jelly Worm, of course, Bill Dance, and Ricky Green. It was early day tournament, but just happy memories. And then being in this shop, this is our original counter. Oh man, fun times in life. And so many memories being in this shop and being behind this counter, because you heard from every customer whether you wanted to or not. If we have a big important company meeting or something, I love to come in here because it just fires up the emotions of our heritage, where we came from, and trying to take care of our customers. Been a heck of a journey, thanks to a lot of great people. Virgil Ward being a character, we had Virgil Ward's fishing, soap, pork rinds. Much of this is just unchanged from the original shop. We had some of our Bass Pro labeled jigs and spinner baits from early on. But happy memories in here. This is my mom, a big catfish my grandpa noodled on the Sac River. My mom has always been a keen fisherman in our family. My dad said she was a lucky fisherman, but I think she proved him wrong. She was the best. And we talked about the White River and the history. I love this picture of Forrest Wood as a guide, and he modified the old wooden John boat by making a fiberglass John boat, and then that eventually evolved into the Ranger, and pioneering as a fisherman with a lot of passion, a lot of savvy, pioneering modern day bass boat. This is my dad, my hero in life, my best fishing buddy, John A. And he was a pretty good mentor in business. He was real big on delivering value to customers. This picture wouldn't mean much to the average person, but it just reminds me, we were sending out a flyer to customers, and my sisters and my aunts were mailing these, licking these stamps, mailing these little flyers out to get people to sign up to buy a catalog. They called me one day and said they'd had a major breakthrough. One of my sisters went to Walmart and got some sponges so they didn't have to lick the damn stamps all the time. This old Folgers coffee can with this jerry-rigged thermometer on it, my Uncle Buck, when we first opened up, he would make these deadly eels out of pork rind. He'd go to the butcher shop, cut them up, and he had a whole, him and my aunt, Bill, they had a whole assembly line on their stove, looks like 160 degrees. And he bottled his eels in Gerber baby food jars and load them up with salt to preserve it. That and his jigs he made was like one of our hottest selling lures for the first several years. So Uncle Buck, he really got me into bass fishing. Thank you, Uncle Buck. But anyway, just a lot of happy memories, life spent fishing. Thank you guys for being here.
Looking back at each of these individual stories and how the White River runs through all of it, it makes you ask questions about, the special nature of the White River, but it also encapsulates the American dream for so many people. These guys all came from middle America, a rural part of the country with not known for its wealth and very remote, and they've created these incredible success stories. It really is the American dream in a nutshell.